All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ryan Canales. I'll be presenting our work on conversational gaze synthesis for avatars. As we may know intuitively, eye motion and gaze is very important for nonverbal communication in real life, and research has in fact found that applying conversational gaze to virtual characters can portray certain aspects of their personality. And in the case of avatars in VR, it can improve the conversational experience in many different ways. The problem currently is that we have platforms like VR Chat, Horizon Worlds that are increasingly popular, and yet eye tracking equipment for the most common VR devices are not there. They're still reserved for the more higher end expensive devices. And even if you do have eye tracking, some people may have concerns over the privacy of their data or their eye tracking data. So one solution for these cases to enable conversational gaze for one's avatar is gaze synthesis. So how do you predict where the eyes should be looking and how they should move? So in our work, we synthesize the gaze using a combination of head movement of the given from like a HMD and audio features. Previous work on gaze synthesis could broadly be categorized into data-driven or non-data-driven or parametric procedural approaches. And from those, there are some that were specifically for conversation. So our work, we propose a data-driven approach that is specifically for two-person conversations in a real-time virtual reality scenario. So to do that, we actually collected our own mocap data of people participating in two-party conversations. We used a Pupil Labs Core wearable eye tracker, a OptiTrack mocap system to capture the head movement of the two people involved in the conversation, and we had a microphone that recorded the audio as well. In total, we captured about 36 minutes of mocap data from 11 conversations. We then take the eye tracking data and do a multi-step pre-processing method. So on the graph on the right, we see the horizontal component example of the gaze direction before our processing, which is highlighted on the upper graph, and then after, so those regions are more smoothed out now. Then we perform feature extraction from the mocap data and the audio data. So motion features include the facing direction, so that's where the main user is facing, like their head direction. The vector between the other conversational participant and the main participant. And we had 3 versions or variations of audio features. So one version was just no audio features. We only used motion features for inferring the gaze direction. Another one was audio represented as a 0 or 1. So 0 when they are not speaking and 1 when they were speaking. And those were manually labeled. And another that uses relative pitch and intensity. So the difference in pitch and intensity between consecutive frames. We also augmented the motion training data set by mirroring it. For training and inference, we use a relatively simple recurrent neural network. It takes as input 4 seconds of those features, so motion features and audio features, and it outputs the gaze direction as horizontal and vertical angles, so those are theta and phi. The loss function was the mean squared error between the predicted gaze direction and the ground truth eye-tracked gaze direction, and that was multiplied by a constant that was 1 where the provided gaze samples were high quality, and 0 when those samples were bad.
That's the worst.
It's ridiculous.
It's a video of our
I'm so afraid
output.
of credit card debts. Like that's why I'm afraid to open like a major credit card account. Like,
I opened my first one like in the past year because I only ever used my debit because I don't want to spend money I didn't have.
That's me too. Like, if I don't have it, like, I'm not gonna spend it. So.
Right, so just to point out a couple of details here in this example, you can more clearly see some of the artifacts that exist in the original tracked eye motion data, especially around blinks. Our model does not reproduce those artifacts. And you can also see subtle influence of the head movement on the gaze direction. So quick model evaluation involved an ablation on the input features. We trained different versions of the model, some that had only audio features, one with motion features only. The models that had the lowest validation and test set losses were our motion-only model with the augmented or mirrored motion training set, and that model with the binary audio as features. So we use those in further evaluation in a user study. Our user study, we collected responses from 64 MTurk participants who watched 3 short animation clips, and there were 6 versions of each clip. Those 6 versions were different ways of animating the eyes on the virtual character. So there was our model with the augmented or mirrored motion training sets, our model with audio as a binary feature, no eye animation, so their eyes were not moved at all, they just stayed still. The original pre-processed motion, and an off-the-shelf procedural gaze model called realistic eye movements that was based off of Eyes Alive and other early eye animation research with an adjusted look at parameters. So we adjusted how often the character looked toward toward the camera in this case, to match that of our training set, which is actually similar to what research has found people typically make eye contact while conversing. And then that same model, but with its default parameters. And participants rated naturalness, how natural the eyes looked, engagement, likability, and how much the eye movement matched the avatar speech. All right, so in terms of naturalness, unfortunately, the realistic eye movements package was rated higher than both of our models. And even the one with default parameters was rated higher than our motion-only model without audio features. Another interesting result was that no eye animation was rated significantly higher than the original motion. In terms of engagement, so how they rated how much it seemed the avatar was engaged in the conversation, we found an interaction effect between the conversation, so that was the animation clip, and the animation condition, so how the eyes were animated. So looking at it by conversation, we found a significant difference for conversation 2, where both the realistic eye movements models, the adjusted and the default parameters, were rated higher than our model with motion and audio input. But for conversation 3, the realistic eye movements model were rated higher than original, but our model with motion and audio input was also rated higher than original. In terms of how much users liked the eye movements, the realistic eye movements package with the adjusted parameter was liked significantly more than our model with motion features only. No animation, again, was rated higher than original, and the 2 REM versions were also rated higher than the original motion. And finally, in terms of how well the eye motions match the avatar speech, the adjusted realistic eye movement model was rated higher than both of our models and the original motion, and the default parameters and no animation were rated higher than original. So generally speaking, the realistic eye movements package, so this procedural model with an adjusted look at parameter, was rated most favorably in our user study, when the original pre-processed gaze data was rated the lowest perhaps due to artifacts as shown in the video that I showed earlier. And somewhat surprising result was that no animation was rated relatively high, perhaps because it didn't contain any sorts of motion artifacts. And when the avatar looked toward the camera, it generally seemed like it was making eye contact with the camera, probably from the viewer's point of view. Our models were rated higher than the original motion as well, likely because they didn't reproduce those artifacts from the eye tracker data. Limitations to our work is the relatively small data set. It was only 36 minutes of data from a handful of different conversational partners. We also only predict the gaze direction, so we're not predicting blinks or predicting any areas of interest or anything like that. And in our user study, we only had relatively short animation clips viewed on a screen. So results may change in longer conversations in a more immersive setting. And so in conclusion, based off of our user study, we can say that simple gaze or procedural gaze models like realistic eye movements with adjusted parameters may suffice for short conversations. However, we believe that machine learning approaches have a lot of potential as they can leverage spatial temporal context, and with a larger data set, a more diverse data set, more intricate models like GANs or any recent transformer model can be used to lead to potentially more realistic and believable results. That's all I have. Thank you very much.